The dry wind came low and lazy across the plains outside Willow Run, carrying dust, heat, and 100 unspoken opinions. They said Jonas Calloway had finally lost his senses. The wealthiest cattleman west of the Cimarron, owner of more land than the courthouse could map, and the one bachelor every widow and preacher's niece had once circled like buzzards over a tired steer, was getting married. But not to beauty, not to a southern belle in satin gloves or an eastern debutante with perfume and pedigree. Number Jonas Calloway had sent for Maribel Quinn, the daughter of a ruined rancher, a woman whose name stirred no envy, no desire, just puzzled glances and snide remarks like, "She's plain as prairie chalk." The whispers started long before she stepped off that stagecoach. By the time her boots hit the dirt, Jonas stood waiting, stone-faced as ever. No flowers, no music, just the low whistle of wind across the dust. Maribel squared her shoulders, eyes scanning the faces that judged her already. But when her gaze met Jonas's, she didn't flinch. She nodded once. He returned the gesture, and just like that, a marriage began. Not with love, but with terms. But out here, even the hardest ground can surprise you, especially when a seed dares to take root. The first thing Maribel Quinn noticed wasn't the size of the ranch, though it loomed large against the prairie sky. It was the silence. Not the kind found in churches or graveyards, but a working kind. The kind built out of sweat and expectation. Jonas Calloway stood in that silence, broad-shouldered and stone-faced, like the land itself had shaped him. Maribel descended from the wagon with dust on her boots and a letter of promise in her satchel. The sun pressed down hard, tinting the edges of her vision gold. Her bonnet, tied too tightly against the wind, did little to hide her crooked jaw or the thin scar that traced her right cheekbone. She didn't look up at Jonas immediately. She didn't need to. She felt his gaze like the weight of a loaded coin. "Miss Quinn?" he asked, voice low, not unkind. She turned, chin lifted. "I go by Maribel." He gave a single nod, one she'd later come to know meant agreement, not welcome. Jonas wasn't a man to waste words, and she wasn't a woman to beg for more than necessary. They stood a moment longer in that mutual silence, until a chestnut mare whinnied from the corral behind the barn, breaking the spell. Jonas gestured toward the main house, a long, narrow structure built with more utility than pride. She followed him up the steps and into a room that smelled of cured leather and old ash. "I've cleared the guest room," he said. "You can settle in there till we speak with the preacher." "No ceremony?" she asked. His jaw shifted. "Just papers." Maribel nodded. That was what she agreed to, after all. A paper marriage, not a courtship. A place to live in exchange for steady hands and the assumption of a wife's role. She wasn't a romantic, not anymore. Not since her father's ranch burned and the bank took the rest. She'd learned that survival didn't care for flowers or music. Jonas watched her place her satchel on the floor. "You were honest in your letter about not being sought after. And you were honest about needing help," she said, looking him square in the eye. "We're even." There was something in his stare, not warmth, but a faint shift, like he recognized the steadiness in her voice as something familiar. He left her then, with a curt, "Supper's at sundown," and the sound of his boots fading into the hallway. The ranch was wide and wild, the kind of place that looked like it might shake off a weak hand. Maribel spent the afternoon walking its edge, noting the drooping fence lines, the blistered pasture, the cracked water troughs. It wasn't failing, not yet, but it was close, the kind of close only a seasoned rancher would see. When sundown came, she sat at Jonas's table with a bowl of rabbit stew between them and a single oil lamp flickering over their plates. "You live alone long?" she asked. 3 years. He didn't elaborate, but she didn't ask. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It had a kind of rhythm, like hoofbeats in soft earth. "You expect me to cook?" she asked, half teasing. He raised a brow. "Can you? Enough not to starve." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That'll do." After supper, he cleared the table while she dried the plates. He didn't ask about her scar, and she didn't ask about the wooden frame tucked behind the hearth, its glass gone, its contents burned out. Some stories were best read by their missing pages. By morning, Maribel was in the barn before the rooster crowed. She saddled the mule herself, led it to the west pasture, and spent 3 hours mending the worst of the fence. Jonas found her there, hammer in hand, shirt sleeves rolled. "You don't waste time," he said. "I didn't come here to braid daisies." That was the first time he truly looked at her. Not at her face, but at the way she moved, sure-footed, no flourish. He handed her a water skin, and they drank side by side, watching a distant storm cloud roll low across the southern plain. "She won't break it," she said, nodding toward the mule. "She? I named her Gertie. She looks like one." Jonas exhaled a short breath through his nose. A laugh, maybe. That afternoon, they rode to town together. The preacher signed the paper without fuss. Maribel wrote her name with no flourish, just ink and decision. Jonas pressed his thumbprint beside hers, and just like that, she was Mrs. Calloway. No wedding dress, no guess. Only the wind through the cottonwoods and the sound of a pen scratching across parchment. On the ride back, Maribel asked, "Will the town care?" Jonas shook his head. "They talk no matter what. You'll learn to ignore it." She nodded, but she knew it would come. The stares, the whispers about the plain bride, the scar-faced woman who wed the most stubborn rancher in the county. "They'll say I tricked you," she murmured. Jonas guided his horse closer. "Let them." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not pity, but something better. Recognition, not love, not yet, but the kind of mutual understanding that could weather things other couples didn't survive. When they reached the ranch gate, she dismounted first, holding the gate open for him. He passed through, giving her a nod that felt more like an invitation than thanks. And behind them, the prairie wind shifted, just slightly. Like it, too, had been waiting for something to begin. The morning after they signed the marriage papers, Maribel woke before dawn. The cabin was dark but warm, the fire still alive under the ash. She sat up, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Jonas had left already. She could tell by the lack of creaking floorboards and the cold in his coffee mug. He moved like a man used to, waking up before thought took root. Outside, the wind whispered over the dry prairie grass, brushing the porch like a warning. Maribel poured herself a cup of coffee, black and sharp, and stepped out to watch the sky lighten. Gertie whinnied from the corral, and in the distance a hawk cut lazy circles over the field. She was still getting used to the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the brittle, stretched, too thin kind that came before a break. The ranch wasn't failing, but it was tired. The land, the buildings, even Jonas himself carried that weight. He didn't say it, but she saw it, in the way his shoulders never dropped, in the way his boots barely left a print, like even gravity gave up trying to hold him down. By the time she finished her coffee, Jonas had returned from the creek, a pair of dead coyotes slung over the back of his gelding. "Found them by the lower fence line," he said, "torn into 2 calves. "Damn," Maribel muttered. "That's the 3rd attack this week." He nodded grimly. "If we don't find where they're getting through, we'll lose more." "I'll ride east and check the boundary posts," she offered. "You can ride south, see if the dry gulch washed out again." Jonas eyed her. "You don't have to." "I'm married into this," she said flatly. "I'm not hanging curtains while you patch holes." His expression didn't change, but something in his jaw eased. They saddled their horses in silence. When she mounted, Jonas handed her a shotgun, an old Remington, oiled and worn. "Just in case," he said. She took it without question. The eastern boundary ran through a low ridge of limestone and cedar brush. The posts there were warped, some leaning, one snapped clean in 2. A trail of scat and paw prints confirmed her suspicion. Coyotes had found a pass-through. She dismounted, drove a wedge into the broken post, and set about reinforcing it with wire. Her hands moved fast, practiced, and she found herself humming under her breath. Her father had taught her this work, before the drought took the land, and the bank took everything else. After an hour, she stood back, brushed the dirt off her knees, and scanned the horizon. Far off, dusk curled. Jonas returning. When he rode up, his hat pulled low against the sun, she called out, "The brake's here. They've been using it like a door." "I figured," he said, dismounting. "Gulch is fine, but I saw smoke west of the range line." She stiffened. "Brush fire?" He nodded. Small, but could run if the wind turns. How far? 5 miles near the Fletcher line. Maribel's face soured. The Fletchers were careless ranchers, lazy fencing, dry brush stacked near arroyos, and a bad habit of burning fields without watching the wind. They won't own up if it jumps your fence. I know. They rode to the ridge overlooking the western pasture. From there they could see a faint smear of smoke, rising like a prayer gone wrong. Jonas crouched, watching the wind stir the grass. We need a break line. If it jumps the stream bed, it'll chew straight through our hayfield. We don't have enough men, she said, thinking aloud. But if we dig fast, clear a strip around the west edge, we might stop it. He turned to her. You know how to set a backfire? She nodded. Learned during the 1875 burns. My father made me practice with a wet gunny sack and a shovel. He studied her again, the way he did when weighing a new tool in his hand. Not judgmental, just cautious. Then he stood. Let's start. They dug until their arms burned. The line was crude, but it would do. When the sun dipped low and the wind began to shift, Jonas lit the torch and dropped it into the dried grass along the firebreak. Flames flared up, brief and fast, crawling along the line with hungry speed. The controlled burn pushed back toward the oncoming fire, smoke rising thick and hot. Maribel stood watch with the shovel, tamping sparks before they could leap. Jonas worked the far end, eyes fixed on the advancing plume. For nearly 2 hours they battled the fire. By the time it died, their clothes stank of smoke, their skins streaked with soot. Jonas dropped his torch and looked at her, face unreadable. You know, he said hoarsely, I figured you'd come here quiet and keep to yourself. Maribel wiped her brow. That what you wanted? He shook his head. Didn't know what I wanted. Still don't. She nodded, grounding the shovel in the dirt. Good. Neither do I. But I know this. If the fire comes again, we don't run. He looked at her then, really looked, not with surprise, but with something like agreement. That's the kind of wife I need, he said quietly. She gave him a tired smile. That's the kind I am. They didn't embrace, didn't even touch, but they stood side by side while the wind cooled the earth and the smoke drifted away like a threat that had missed its chance. And behind them, the ranch, tired but intact, stood waiting for whatever came next. The ranch hands had started watching her differently. It wasn't the lewd glances she might have expected. Maribel Quinn knew those, and these weren't that. This was worse, a kind of wariness, as if they weren't sure whether to salute or back away. Jonas hadn't said a word about her presence in the fields, nor had he corrected her when she questioned fence placement or suggested rotating the herd, and that unsettled them. To most of them, a ranch wife wasn't meant to speak unless it was over supper. On the fourth morning, when she entered the tack house before dawn, one of the younger men, Samuel, a cowhand barely out of boyhood, froze with a coil of rope in his hand. Didn't mean to be in your way, ma'am, he muttered, backing off like she'd struck him. You're not, she said, brushing past. Where's the ledger for the tool rotation? He blinked. Boss keeps that in the main house. No, she said firmly. He moved it here yesterday, said it'd save time. She didn't wait for agreement, just found the ledger under a saddle blanket and started flipping through pages. Jonas had, in fact, said nothing of the sort, but if she wanted to be taken seriously, she'd need to speak like someone who already belonged. Later that day, she found Jonas near the south pasture, crouched beside a patch of trampled earth. A heifer had gone missing. Wolves, most likely, or rustlers. Neither boded well. He looked up when she approached. Tracks run west. Real shallow. Could be strays, but... He didn't finish the thought. We'll find her, Maribel said, but it's not the cow you're worried about. He didn't argue. Rustling had always been a risk, but this was different. The lines between cattle and crime blurred easy on the frontier, and Maribel knew how fast a missing head could turn into a feud. She crouched beside him, studying the prints. Small feet, 2 men, 1 shod horse, she murmured. They weren't rushing. Jonas gave a small nod. That's what I saw. They followed the trail for nearly an hour. At a narrow creek bed, Jonas paused, fingers brushing a deep hoof print. Then he pointed toward a stand of cottonwoods. There. Maribel spotted the smoke first, thin and gray, coiling up from behind a boulder. They dismounted, moved slow. Two figures sat by a fire. One was a boy, no older than 16, boots scuffed, hat too big. The other was lean and weathered, rifle across his knees. At their feet stood the missing heifer, roped and calm, chewing cud like nothing was amiss. Jonas stepped out first. "You're on Callaway land." The older man didn't stand. "Didn't plan to be." "Then why the cow?" "She followed us." Maribel raised an eyebrow. "And you just happened to rope her, start a fire, and cook lunch?" The man smirked. "She was hungry, so were we." Jonas's hand hovered near his belt. "Name?" "Lyle Hart," the man said evenly. "This is my boy. We're heading south. Didn't mean no harm." "You always rope cattle for companionship?" "If I was stealing," Lyle said slowly, "I wouldn't have made a fire." Jonas stared at him for a long moment, then said, "Let the cow go. Walk east till you hit the ridge. Stay off my land." Lyle stood, tossing the rope off the cow. "Fair enough." As they turned to leave, Maribel spoke. "You make this mistake again, I won't be the one telling you to walk." Lyle glanced back. "No offense, ma'am, but you don't seem the shooting kind." She stepped forward, eyes hard. "Then you haven't met the right kind of woman." He looked at Jonas, who gave no sign of disagreement, then tipped his hat and left. That evening, the sun dipped low behind the barns. Jonas leaned against the porch post while Maribel removed her boots by the steps. "You didn't have to follow me today," he said quietly. "I wasn't following. I was working." He nodded slowly. "You think I should have made an example of them?" "Only if you want blood on dry ground. They're desperate, not cruel." A pause, then, "You were right." She looked up, surprised. "About the cow, the tracks, about them." Maribel almost smiled. "That's 2 times in 3 days you've said that." "I'm counting?" he asked. "I am." They stood quietly. Then Jonas added, "My father wouldn't have liked it. You taking the lead. He sounds like a treat. He was hard, respected order, thought a woman's place was wherever he wasn't." "Well," she said, brushing dust from her trousers, "I'm not your father's wife." He didn't respond, but something in his posture eased. After supper, as she sorted tools by the barn, a figure approached. Jeb Lockett, one of the older hands. "Ma'am," he said, doffing his hat. "Evening, Jeb." He hesitated, voice gruff. "Some of the boys, they ain't sure how to take things. You doing what you do." "Meaning?" "Meaning they're used to the boss making decisions. Men like to know where the lines are." She met his gaze. "Then they best get used to new lines. I'm not here to play house. I'm here to help this ranch stand." Jeb studied her, jaw working. Then he nodded. "That's what I told him." When he walked away, Maribel leaned against the barn door, heart still thumping. Not everyone was on her side. But maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand she wasn't going anywhere. And neither was the fire in her. The morning started like most others. Quiet, with the scent of wood smoke drifting from the chimney and the soft thud of boots on packed earth. Maribel was up before the ranch hands, already checking the southeast fence line with a coil of wire slung across her shoulder. The sun hadn't yet climbed high, but the wind was rising, sharp and dry, the kind that hinted at change. When she returned to the main house, Jonas was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and a ledger spread before him. He looked up, nodded once. "You've been out." "Fence was down near the watering hole. Looks like a mule deer pushed through." He didn't question her, just made a note in the ledger. That was how they'd begun operating. Quietly, efficiently, with a rhythm built not on affection, but on mutual trust. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something, until the knock came. It was sharp and unexpected. 3 raps against the front door, just as Maribel was hanging her coat by the wall. Jonas opened the door slowly. A woman stood on the porch, wrapped in a travel cloak dusted with trail dirt. Her boots were polished despite the wear, and her hat cast a shadow that did little to hide the sharp angles of her face. She smiled. "Hello, Jonas." Maribel didn't move. She watched as Jonas's shoulders went stiff. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he stepped back. "Come in, Evelyn." Maribel's breath caught. Evelyn. That name didn't appear anywhere in the ledgers or barn talk, but it landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. The woman stepped inside like she belonged. I heard the Callaway place was still standing. Figured I'd see for myself. Why now? Jonas asked, his voice low. She shrugged. Passing through, thought I'd say hello and see what kind of woman finally agreed to marry you. Her eyes flicked to Maribel. I'm Maribel Quinn, she said evenly. I don't believe we've met. Not yet, Evelyn said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But I've heard plenty. Word gets around Dodge. Jonas cleared his throat. Evelyn and I used to keep company, Evelyn interrupted. Years ago. There was a silence thick enough to chew. I'll fix some coffee, Maribel said, and disappeared into the kitchen before the fire in her throat could reach her mouth. They sat at the table, Jonas quiet, Evelyn lounging like a cat with claws tucked just out of sight. Maribel brought the coffee and sat without a word. So, Evelyn said, this arrangement you two have, it's real? Maribel looked up. What arrangement? You know, Evelyn said, lifting her cup. The kind where a man marries a woman for convenience, or pity. Jonas stiffened. That's enough. Evelyn shrugged. No harm meant. I just figured Jonas for the type who'd die alone before giving up his pride. He hasn't given up anything, Maribel said quietly. He's building something, and so am I. Evelyn tilted her head. Well now, they're stealing you after all. She stood, brushing off her coat. I should be going. Just wanted to see if the stories were true. Jonas followed her to the porch. Maribel didn't. Through the open door, she heard the hushed exchange. You came to stir trouble? Jonas asked. Evelyn's voice was like silk drawn over glass. I came because I thought I might have made a mistake letting you go. But I see you've settled. Good for you. A pause, then. She's different. Just be sure you know what you're doing, Jonas. Boots on the steps, the sound of a horse being mounted. And then Evelyn was gone. Maribel didn't speak of it. She didn't ask Jonas what Evelyn had meant to him or whether there had been love there once. She focused on the accounts, on the feed storage, on the rotation schedule they were building for winter. But Jonas saw the change, the way her shoulders tightened when he entered a room, the way she never asked if he wanted company when she brought supper to the porch. One night, as they were finishing their notes by lamplight, he finally spoke. Evelyn didn't come for me, he said. Not really. She came to remind herself she still had teeth. Maribel didn't look up. She was part of my life before the war, before the ranch was mine. I thought, once, maybe we'd build something. But she's the kind who likes to break things just to see if they bleed. Maribel closed the ledger. I'm not angry, she said. I just didn't expect to be tested this early. He nodded. You handled her better than I would have. She stood, heading for the stairs. Jonas? Yeah? I'm not here because I'm grateful. I'm here because I chose this. You, the land, all of it. And for the first time, something unspoken in his eyes shifted. Like stone cracking under pressure, not breaking, just changing. The next morning, Evelyn's visit was already town gossip. Jude muttered something about old ghosts never staying buried. The stable boy asked Maribel if the woman in the red cloak was her sister. Maribel just smiled, mounted her mare, and rode south with a clipboard in hand. They had pastures to check, cattle to move. The land didn't care about old flames, only what came next. The first rain in weeks came thin as sewing thread, but it was enough to darken the dust and perk up the prairie grasses. Maribel stood beneath the overhang of the hayshed, sleeves rolled, face tilted toward the sky. She didn't smile, not quite, but her shoulders loosened as the water struck her cheeks. Inside the barn, Jonas was oiling the saddle leather when he saw her there. No bonnet, no umbrella, just standing in it like the land itself. You'll catch cold, he called. Maribel turned toward him. Not if I'm already warm. Jonas chuckled, the sound soft and rare. By the end of that week, the eastern field had greened. The calves born in spring grew bolder, and the books, thanks to Maribel, finally showed more black than red. She'd restructured supply deliveries, negotiated fairer grazing deals with 2 neighboring ranchers, and started drafting a plan to implement wind-powered pumps on the drier acres. I didn't marry a woman, Jonas told Jude one morning. I married a damn operations manual. Jude smirked. That's so? Might be the best contract you ever signed. Despite the improvements, the tension hadn't vanished. Not with Evelyn's echo still lingering in the minds of some of the ranch hands, or in Jonas himself, who, though grateful for all Maribel had brought, wrestled with something harder to name. He'd built the ranch with muscle and grit, but Maribel, she was building its future, and that scared him more than any stampede ever had. Trouble came in a polished wagon with gold trim and wheels too clean for real country use. Maribel spotted it first from the upstairs window. A two-horse rig, driver in a bowler hat, and a tall figure descending with calculated ease. Jonas met them on the porch, arms folded. "Mr. Calloway," said the visitor with a wax smile. "You may not recall me, but my name is Eldon Price. My uncle Wallace Price once ran cattle through these very hills. Bought up half the valley before the war." "I remember Wallace," Jonas said, tone flat. "He's the reason I built this place twice." "Then you know the name carries weight." Jonas didn't answer. Eldon stepped forward. "I've come with an offer. One you'd be wise to hear." Maribel appeared at the doorway, arms crossed. Eldon's gaze flicked to her, then lingered a beat too long. "Mrs. Calloway, I presume?" Maribel nodded. "Say your piece." Eldon cleared his throat. "The Calloway property holds land that once belonged to a rival family, your southwestern field specifically. My partners are prepared to offer double market rate." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Not for sale." "Perhaps reconsider. That land is bone dry and half feral." "Funny," Maribel said. "It's the same patch we just seeded with winter rye and mapped for a windmill." Eldon's smile faded a hair. "A generous offer, I assure you." "And ours is a firm refusal," she said, stepping beside Jonas. "Now if there's nothing else—" Eldon raised a hand. "Be careful where you hang your pride. This region has long memories. The Calloway name still turns heads in Topeka." Jonas took a step forward. "You're standing on my porch, threatening me?" "A reminder, Mr. Calloway, not a threat." "Then take your reminder and ride." Eldon tipped his hat mockingly. "As you wish." When the wagon rolled away, kicking dust back toward town, Maribel glanced at Jonas. "That name always cast a long shadow." "Longer than it deserves," Jonas muttered. "And dirtier." That night, Jonas stayed late in the barn, chopping wood that didn't need splitting. Maribel found him there, sleeves rolled high, sweat painting the back of his shirt. "Something you're trying not to say?" she asked from the doorway. Jonas paused. "That man's uncle bled this land dry, sold water rights to a railroad, got men killed defending what he didn't even own. And now the nephew wants to do it again." He nodded. "I've worked too long to lose it all to a signature." She stepped closer. "Then we don't let them. We build. We hold." Jonas leaned on the axe. "You really believe this place can stand?" Maribel looked around. The neat rows of feed barrels, the lanterns she'd rewired. The coils of new rope hung just so. "Yes," she said, "because now it's not just yours. It's ours." Later that week, they hosted a gathering. Nothing formal, just neighbors and hands. Folks came from all directions. Widow Mathers from over the ridge, the Crowleys from the canyon, even Sam Dupree with his 3 wild boys and fiddle. Maribel served cider and kept the fire steady. Jonas smoked his pipe on the porch, nodding to folks he once only passed in town. As the stars blinked open above the prairie, someone passed around a bottle of cherry whiskey. The fiddle took on a sharper tune, and hands clapped in time. It was Maribel who stepped forward, offered her hand to Jonas. He looked surprised. "I don't dance." "You don't try," she said, smiling. And he did try. Awkwardly at first, boots heavy, steps off rhythm. But Maribel steadied him, hand warm in his. They danced under starlight and lantern glow, the wind threading through the grass like a lullaby. Later that night, after the guests rode home, and the last lantern was snuffed, Jonas stood by the window, watching the fields. Maribel came up behind him, quiet. "I meant what I said," she told him. "So did I." He turned to her. "I'm married for structure, for help. But you've given me more than that, Maribel." She searched his face. "You've given me hope." And this time, it was she who leaned in. Not out of obligation, not out of gratitude, but because something between them had turned real, and she wasn't afraid to name it anymore. The morning broke, pale and brittle, a hush over the Callaway Ranch like the earth itself had paused to hear what would come next. Jonas stood on the porch, rifle resting against one leg, steam curling from the tin mug in his hand. Below him, the field stretched wide and gold under a low sun. His land, his choice, and now maybe hers too. Behind him, the door creaked open. Maribel stepped out, wrapping her shawl tighter against the cold. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside him, looking at the same horizon. Jonas didn't glance her way. He didn't need to. "They'll come again today," she said. He nodded. "Eldon Price doesn't strike me as the patient kind." Maribel's eyes were tired but sharp. "Then we finish this." They had spent the night preparing, boarded windows, loaded rifles, letters to the county office and the neighboring ranchers. Jonas had even moved the deed to the cabin floor, under the loose plank near the hearth. If something happened, he told Maribel, someone would know what this land had cost. But neither of them had slept. As the sun climbed, a dust plume appeared to the west, then resolved into a black carriage and 3 riders on horseback. Jonas and Maribel didn't move. The carriage rolled up to the yard, creaking under its own arrogance. Eldon Price stepped out like a banker, come to collect on a man's last breath. "Morning, Mr. Callaway," he called, adjusting his gloves. Jonas stepped off the porch slowly, boots crunching. "Didn't think you'd bring company. That shows poor manners." Eldon gave a short, practiced laugh. "Legal men, witnesses. I came for a signature, not a fight." Maribel stood taller on the porch. "You came with men packing rifles for a signature?" Eldon turned his smile on her, but it didn't hold. "You must be the new mistress of Callaway Ranch. Miss Quinn, was it? You've stirred quite the gossip. They say you're the one running things now." Jonas's voice was quiet but hard. "She's not running things. She's building them. You got a problem with that?" Eldon gestured lazily toward his lawyer, who produced a stack of papers from a leather satchel. "My offer still stands. Triple market value now, Mr. Callaway. That southwestern field, useless to you. Priceless to my partners. You sign and we're done." Jonas didn't look at the papers. He looked at Maribel. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. "You think money makes you right," Jonas said finally, "but it just makes you louder." Eldon's eyes narrowed. "I've tried to handle this respectfully, but if you won't sell, my lawyers will bury you in injunctions. You'll spend the next year just trying to haul your own feed. You'll lose before the cattle ever do." Maribel spoke now, her voice level. "Then we lose. On our feet." Eldon took a step forward, his calm beginning to crack. "Don't make a mistake just to feel noble. There's no honor in starving." Jonas moved between him and Maribel. "And there's no pride in selling what ain't yours to give." The moment stretched. Eldon's men rested hands on their holsters. One shifted his horse nervously. Jonas didn't blink. Then from the east came a second dust cloud. Riders. A dozen at least. As they drew closer, it became clear they weren't with Eldon Price. It was Clayton Reeves, the old rancher from Bitter Ridge, and behind him, some of the smaller ranchers from neighboring lands, Anders, McCready, and the rest. They rode slow, deliberate, stopping just outside the yard. Every man carried a rifle, not raised, just present. Jonas looked to Maribel, and her eyes sparked. Clayton tipped his hat. "Heard you might need neighbors." Jonas smiled, small and real. "I reckon we might." Eldon took a long breath. "So this is how it is?" "No," Maribel said softly. "This is what it becomes when folks stop being afraid of men with pens and polished boots." Eldon's lips thinned. He stepped back toward his carriage. "This isn't over." Jonas raised his voice so the whole yard heard it. "It is if you take that road out of here." Eldon stared a moment longer, but then turned, climbing into the carriage. His men followed without a word. The carriage rolled away. Only when the dust fully settled did Jonas exhale. Maribel stepped down and stood beside him. "That was a gamble." He nodded. "Most things worth keeping are." The other ranchers approached, and for the first time, there was no unease in their expressions, just a kind of reverent respect. Clayton dismounted. "You held firm. Both of you. That means something around here." Jonas shook his hand. "We'll hold for more than just ourselves if it comes to it." "We know," Clayton said. "That's why we came." By sundown, the yard had emptied, but a new stillness hung in the air. Not fear, but calm. A knowing. Inside the cabin, Jonas stood at the hearth while Maribel boiled water for coffee. She moved like she belonged there now, because she did. He watched her for a while, then spoke. "You ever wonder how things end up the way they do?" Maribel didn't turn. "Every day. I don't remember the first time I hoped for more. Maybe the day you wrote in." She set the pot down, then looked at him. "You didn't ask for a partner, but I became one." He stepped closer. "And I never asked to fall in love with a woman everyone underestimated." Maribel blinked. "Say that again." Jonas, "I love you." Maribel stepped into him, hands at his chest. "I didn't marry for love," she said quietly, "but I stayed for it." Then softer. "Let's choose each other. Every day, no matter what rides in." And in the quiet cabin on Callaway land, two people who had nothing to prove to anyone else finally let their guard down. And when their hands met, it wasn't ceremony. It was truth. The wind still carries stories out here, of land fought for, of names nearly buried, and of two souls who refused to bow to anyone else's expectations. Maribel Quinn arrived with nothing but her name and her will. Jonas Callaway offered her ground to stand on. Together, they built something the Plains would remember. But now it's your turn. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Did this story remind you of something you've lived, lost, or still hold on to? We'd love to know what moment hit you hardest. Was it Maribel standing her ground, or Jonas finally lowering his guard? If tales like this one stir something in you, courage, hope, or just the love of a well-earned ending, be sure to like, subscribe, and tap that bell so you don't miss the next ride into the wild unknown. Until then, keep the fire burning, the rifle oiled, and your heart open. Another story waits just past the horizon.